Bryce Greene, the redoubtable campaigner and commentator. Bryce, welcome back to the mother of all talk shows. First of all, North Carolina, now Florida. They say that people are giving up on FEMA, the emergency agency in the United States. And unbelievably, 4 weeks out from the presidential election, Kamala Harris and Joe Biden are claiming there's no money for the people being devastated by these freak weather conditions. How's that all going down amongst the electorate?
Well, it's part of a broader trend of Americans understanding that their institutions that were supposed to protect them are either incapable or unwilling to do so. The American military machine has been giving bombs and weapons to all sorts of people around the world, most notably Israel, to continue its genocide against the Palestinians. But for Americans who are harmed by the dramatic storms that are being exacerbated by our climate policies, for Americans that are suffering, that are losing their homes, that are being drenched in gallons of water, they got $750 and a pat on the back, and maybe some nice rhetoric in the press. But in reality, an organization like FEMA or like even the U.S. military should be doing far more to protect the people. But the government, the Biden administration, and the bureaucrats around him, they're not that concerned with the hurricane damage, only insofar as it might affect their electoral chances, but that doesn't seem to be a big concern. Their big concern seems to be continuously sending money to Israel as they expand in their broader war, making plans to potentially strike Iranian nuclear sites, drawing up lists of weapons that they need. This is a disaster both for the world, who has to live in the world of American militarism and as American weapons proliferate in regions that they didn't intend, but also for the American public, who, with declining living standards, with increasing cost of living, also have to contend with climate disaster and a government that increasingly understands that the will of the people, that the needs of the people aren't that important.
$750 as a loan, incidentally, not as a gift or a grant. They have to pay it back. $750 to the people.
That doesn't appear to be true. It does appear to be a grant that does not have to be paid back. There was a bit of confusion based on some comments made by some officials. But after all the information comes out, it does appear not to be a loan. But I mean, that's only part of the scandal. I mean, the fact that the number is so low is the most disgusting part. The fact that $750 is barely enough to make it for a family of four to go about a month. I mean, it's ridiculous when people's homes have been destroyed and when they've been abandoned by their government.
Yeah, $127 million to Lebanon when America is paying at both ends. America is paying for Israel to level Lebanon and paying Lebanon $127 million for the relief of the people fleeing from the bombs America gave that fell on them in the first place, let alone the $13 billion which they've given to Israel for the genocide in Gaza. And God knows what it's going to cost your taxpayer in the end to the defense of the Kiev regime, the attacks on the Yemenis over the last few days. Our taxes, your taxes, both went into that. The maintenance of your fleet in the Persian Gulf, in the Eastern Mediterranean. And yet there's no money for people in America itself subject to natural disaster. Even the dumbest American voter must be beginning to notice something about this. Surely, Bryce.
Well, one would hope so. It seems clear that every 4 years that there's a pageant where this guy who represents the Blues and this guy who represents the Reds come together and say how much they're going to help the American people. But I think this election, more than previous elections, people are starting to realize that while they're suffering and while they're It's harder to pay for healthcare. It's harder to buy a home. It's harder to send your kids to school. It's harder to do literally everything. I mean, going to the grocery store is a political act now these days. Uh, but while that's happening, the oligarchs who run this country are sending billions and billions of dollars, not to help people, but to fuel these wars, these conflicts, these flashpoints around the world that, far from helping the American people, actually endanger the world and everyone else. Uh, Each of these conflicts has the potential to go nuclear. And I don't think that people understand the consequences of something like that. If U.S. escalations in Taiwan lead to nuclear war, if U.S. escalations against Russia lead to nuclear war, I don't think that anyone, even the oligarchs who are making money from all these wars, are going to benefit when there's no world. But that seems to be the direction we're going, and the American people now more than ever are understanding that there are no adults in the room. I will say that there is a population of Americans that do seem to understand this, and that's the Muslim population, many of whom have decided to endorse and support Jill Stein, a third party for the presidency. Well, while this is largely symbolic, it's indicative of a changing politics, a changing common sense in how Americans approach their electoral system. They no longer want to serve oligarchs by voting for which branch of the oligarchy that they like. No, they have rejected this framework of oligarchy, Zionist, ideological imperial control. And I think that's a positive development. The only question is whether or not we, as organizers on the ground, will be able to continue to push that sort of message to the American public.
Well, I predicted on Sunday that Jill Stein will defeat Kamala Harris in the state of Michigan and make a big difference to Harris's vote in other states like Wisconsin, like Pennsylvania. I believe that Jill Stein, the only Jewish candidate in the race, by the way, and the only candidate that is against bombing other women and other people's children in other countries, I think she's going to do very well. I think she'll breach the 5%, which would get her matching funding from the state and in the future augur well for a third-party breakthrough in America. Do you buy any of that?
I think it's certainly possible. And I've talked to many friends who are organizing up there, who are doing work with the uncommitted campaign, who are doing work with the Palestine Solidarity Movement up there. And there's a lot of energy up there, and it's definitely going to bleed into and affect other aspects of politics that aren't just advocacy for basic human rights. It's also about why doesn't Flint have water? It's also about why, again, are people's living standards declining? The answer isn't. The answers aren't going to be found with the Democratic Party or the Republican Party. It's going to be found with a different method of doing politics. And what's clear is that people are gaining the tools now to understand how these systems work, how these systems rely on tricking people that they're going to vote for them. I mean, just go and look at the rhetoric that Kamala Harris is using. Using joy, labeling or tokenizing marginalized groups, saying that she's one of them, and she's from a middle class background. We have all heard time and time again. All of this is just using and abusing these people for her own political gains. No one really expects that Kamala or Trump or anyone is actually in the election to better their lives, and so they're seeking another way.
Now, let's turn to the pageant, as you called it. The mass media is still doing everything that it can to make a silk purse out of the sow's ear that is the Kamala Harris candidature. 60 Minutes was the latest to do it, where they, in the editing process, tried their best to make Kamala Harris look less of an idiot than she would have if the raw footage had been aired. I don't know if you have any comment on that, but I'm wondering if there's any sign of despair in the mainstream media yet that it looks like all their efforts are in vain, and that the orange man looks like he's headed for a big win.
Well, I don't think there's any despair in the media. I mean, they don't understand when they've messed up, when they're pushing a false narrative, and when they're misleading the public. They have no shame. But it does seem like the initial boost that Kamala got after Joe Biden announced that he was no longer running for president, that boost is starting to wear off, and the Trump's numbers are starting to close. And there are people who are getting a little bit worried about that. But I think the root cause of this, aside from Kamala being someone who has no discernible true beliefs and who has a track record of stomping over the most marginalized people in the country, I think besides that, it seems to be her boss isn't making it that easy for her. Her boss is giving her an October surprise in the form of a broader Middle East war, and a war that's not very popular. Sending American troops to the Middle East, again, a decision that's not popular. In America, there has been, for the last few years, a crisis of even trying to get people to join the military. They're trying all these gimmicks to try and recruit people to the military, but people don't want to do it precisely because things like this, precisely because they might end up going over to die because Israel can't stand to live with brown people in the Middle East. It's ridiculous. And now those policies are being associated with Kamala. I mean, it's her administration as well. And these are disastrous policies that affect people's lives and that people see her name on. And that's very difficult to come back from when you're running for president. And so I think Joe Biden seems to be one of Kamala Harris's biggest obstacles to being being president next year.
Trump, on the other hand, you would have thought he would know the demographics, the voting stats. 76% of Jewish Americans voted for Joe Biden rather than him in the last election. At least that's what the automated voting machine said. The likelihood is that that Jewish American voters, other than those who hate Netanyahu, who hate what the state of Israel is doing, who are quite likely to vote for the Jewish candidate, Jill Stein. I saw Trump wearing a kippah at the shrine, can only be described as a shrine, to the Rabbi Schneerson in New York. He's the head of a Jewish organization that was revealed to be tunneling under the city of New York. And there was Trump paying tribute at the court of the late rabbi, for all the world as if he thought that by being as slavishly pro-Israel, he will somehow benefit electorally. Is he miscalculating that?
He's absolutely not. There is a lot of ink spilled over describing the American electoral system, describing how politicians rise and fall and succeed and fail. But not enough of it is focused on this over-determining reality that whoever has the most money will typically win their election. And the lobbying groups that fund these candidates are usually the determining factor in any election. Well, one of the most important, largest, most influential lobbying groups in America is the pro-Israel lobby. The loose affiliation of organizations, NGOs, university programs, super PACs, politicians, media figures, all of whom are devoted to this project of a greater Israel and devoted to ensuring that the flow of American weapons, economic and political support to Israel continues unabated. Those are the people that Trump is kowtowing to. Those are the people that Trump believes that if he, kisses Israel's feet enough, will benefit him in the election. And there's evidence that it's working. The Adelson widow gave Trump's campaign millions and millions of dollars. There's wide evidence that Trump might be one of Israel's top people. And in fact, you see people like RFK Jr., who, again, kowtowing to Israel almost to the point of embarrassment. but he has since dropped out of the race and endorsed Trump. So there seems to be a very large contingent of this Israel lobby that we're talking about getting behind Trump. Will that be enough to sway the election? Who knows? But for the Israel lobby, they need not despair too much because they have on the other side of the aisle Kamala Harris and Joe Biden, who, while they might voice the occasional criticism, while there might be the occasional leak about Biden's frustrated conversations with Netanyahu, they haven't even dreamed of stopping the flow of munitions and support for Israel's genocide. They haven't even dreamed of sanctioning Israel. They haven't even dreamed of calling out Israel in the United Nations. And that's exactly what the Israel lobby wants. The path of least resistance for every American politician is to get down on their knees and worship at the altar of Israel. That's just a factor of how organized they've been able to be over the last 50, 60 years. And we see pushback against that in the form of the uncommitted movement and the candidacy of Jill Stein and all the grassroots movements, including here at Indiana University, that are pushing back against its consensus. But Trump certainly isn't incorrect to think that if he just supports Israel, if he does whatever Israel wants, then they'll reward him with election support.
God save us. Bryce Greene, thank you very much indeed for that tour of the American horizon.